Well, thank you, everybody. And I'm Dave Davis. And you see there's a bunch of letters, acronyms here behind my name. I'm very heavy involved in the Project Management Institute. And by the way, some of these are project manager, certified program manager, business analysis. And it gets into AHAP, even has to do with hybrid project management, authorized trainer. Don't want to spend a lot of time talking about me. And by the way, the first 5 minutes are the most important, so I should spend getting into the content instead of talking about me. So let's go ahead and just do that. And again, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I've talked with your group before, and you guys do some wonderful things, and um, just keep going. And what kind of got me into even doing this topic was I'll say value streams in vogue right at the moment. It's pretty popular. There's lots of things going on with it. And I'm going to kind of give you an idea of my experience with it because before people can realize how do we work within or use a value stream, you kind of need to know what one is. So what I'm going to be talking about here in general, it's pretty quick flow. I'm one of these that I maybe put more bullet points I need to on a thing and kind of whip through them. So I don't read these to you, but I kind of go to them. So I figure you're kind of reading them while I'm talking a little bit. So questions, whatever, raise your hand, all those things. But I'm going to talk about really what is a value stream, and I use the term set the stage. Next, the project components of value stream. And then I'll talk about the whole concept of continuous improvement. Then I'm going to get into some things about mapping. So, and mapping what we do with the value stream. One of my biggest concerns or problems, complaints, whatever, is we have these people building projects and things kind of in a silo, and they're not really seeing the real world. So they may be doing something that they think is great, and they don't realize what key metrics are being impacted by this. And so they do this thing, it's wonderful, great, it goes out there, and for whatever reason, the metrics are suddenly calculated differently or something weird with the metric, and nobody knew because they don't have that integration. So we're going to talk about mapping what's being done with projects. All projects should be adding value, right? And then look at one with the lessons learned coming into the value stream. So let me get started. A value stream in general, it's the sequence of events to deliver a product or service. It's process, people, resources. The example I like using, really how I got indoctrinated in the value stream, had to do with an assembly line. I was with General Electric. We were implementing what was called Brilliant Factory, which is a fancy way of saying using software to automate some people out of jobs. And what we were doing with major electrical assembly uh, components. So we had huge low voltage, high voltage. Those are some of the different areas of electric distribution units. And they were put together, one into the assembly line they started. So they put a piece here, put a piece there, put a piece there, and across the thing. And there were like seven of them. But there were some things in there like they needed doors. So another part of the plant was building the door. They didn't even start building the door until it was like at step two. So there was a lot of things with coordinating value streams in that. So that's what got me indoctrinated into it. And we put in a Brilliant Factory. We actually put in three of them, one in Puerto Rico, one in Mexico, and one in Poland. And when I went to Poland, it was kind of my first one really indoctrinated as the entire plant was involved. They had their value stream printed out, and it went all the way around a conference room and halfway all the way down one wall and halfway down the other in like 8-point font in Polish. No, that's remember it is in Polish, so it's like it made no sense to me at all. But they had the detail down. It was amazing, and I'll come back to this a little bit later. But like where the screws came from, who ordered the screws, when the screws were delivered, and some of those things, and then the inventory where the screws were, and it turned out that they had some incentives that engineers could get paid a little bit more if they made some changes to quote advance the design. And so what some of them were doing, figuring out, well, if we use a brown screw instead of a black screw, that's an enhancement and a change, and it's going to save money because people in this country like brown better than black. And somehow they sold that. So we ended up with this massive selections and everything, and we're supposedly adding value. And then we were supposed to come in with this brilliant factory, find out where in the value chain were the most optimal spots to put in the process or IT automation to improve it. So that got me brought into the value stream. And It was based on Lean and Six Sigma principles and that. And those basically have two big pieces. Eliminating waste means don't don't build what you don't need to build. And the other was stop delay. So my my VP at the time, Robert Rothbeck, said, "Dave, remember what we're doing here is two things," and that's what he said: don't build something we don't need, and really stop delay, because every second is money. Time is money. All those great cliches. So the value streams, a tool now being used pretty well globally, universally, to do this, and that's not new, as I'll show you here in a little while. Let me jump into that. I'm not going to talk about this much, but seeing here, value stream, they started talking about in 1918. So it's 5 years old since Toyota started doing it. And so we were just trying to bring those same concepts to fruition with these brilliant factories. By the way, I want to give you an idea. One of the things I've noticed more and more, I got an email, I guess this was like a year ago or something. Somebody wrote me an email that they had gotten a copy of my PowerPoint presentation and they had no idea what this one slide meant. And it was one, you're supposed to be visual, blah, 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 on slides. So I had nice people, but I didn't have the text. And I realized that what I need to do was these things were being used kind of as textbooks. So you will see me have some slides here that are pretty text intensive, and they're going to have in the upper right hand corner though a little box. And that means that they're there for supporting documentation. I may not even talk about them, but very briefly, but it's there so in case you forward this PDF to somebody else, they kind of get an idea what some of the context is. And I found I tried to do things in the past with notes. And even if you do notes in the PDF or the PowerPoint, people just tend to not see those. Who knows what, why. So that's just a nomenclature. So there's some slides here that are pretty labor intensive, text intensive, but it's for in case, well, you want to read them afterwards, or if you share it with somebody else, they have an idea what some of the context is. So that's where this kind of brief history is. The other thing that's kind of nice is you can go to Google, find this, go to Chat GPT and find a lot of these things. But this isn't something new as far as what value stream is. We definitely have much more scientific approaches to defining things, disciplined around how some of it works. And most important, especially for you in the quality world, we've gotten a lot better at being able to measure what's happening. So with the foundation of having measurements, we're able to track improvements and bring improvements in that all together. And then that's why I'll come back to say, but we've had a little bit of a problem is, there's people on one side of building this stuff, and then there's people actually running the business. And you know what? Every now and then, we probably should talk to each other. So I use a global term here, value stream. No, say again in the box. There's more streams. I mean, there's a bunch of streams that a business analyst, a project manager, and the factory floor worker need to understand. I'm not going to read these: cash flow, talent, etc. So my challenge is going to be to, as a project manager, as they define their work packages, get the work defined, they need to decide how do things fit in these streams and actually build work streams to line up with value streams, and where to plug in some of these things and how do they impact. So if we're doing a work package, these are a set of tasks or function we deliver, we should be able to go to our value stream and say it fits in here. Again, KPIs, I should be able to go to a developer and ask the developer, what KPI is this function you're doing affecting? And how does it affect it? And I found very few that can answer that question. But the ones that I have found that have such a good global grasp of the concept are much more effective as a developer. So what is value stream? And really it's value stream mapping. Value stream in and of itself is conceptual. Again, things move down through a process, and at each point in the process, something is doing that adds value to that thing. If it's assembly line, we're adding components to it. If it's information, we may be doing things like applying tax to a checkout, electronic checkout box, all those different things. So that conceptual piece is really put down into something visual, which is what a value stream map is. I'm talking about is this working with the value stream map and being able to plug these things in with the value stream map. And then this text, I didn't plagiarize this. I just copied it from the internet and gave it the proper reference material here. But value streams basically do that. Visually display the critical steps and processes and the time and volume taken at each stage. And then they show the flow of both materials, information as they progress through the process. So it's really being able to demonstrate the flow. And I'll talk about flow quite a bit later because that's a huge component of value stream in general. By the way, I think for questions for the most part, if you have them, pop them into chat. We'll ask at the end. I've gotten myself guilty a lot of times of answering questions, going down a rabbit hole, and all of a sudden 15 minutes aren't lost, but they've been spent on something I wasn't planning on spending time on. And so I try to control myself. This is a generic template of a value stream. And that's all the more it is, just a very generic template. Some characteristics that are common with value streams, they have beginning and ends with these little funky hairdos that look like Bart Simpson. And that there's icon supplier might be involved where things start, where they end. And it goes through some logistical pieces, but it mainly goes through processes. So each step of a value stream where those stations are, there's a process for being able to do what it is what they do. If I go back to my electrical distribution unit, there may be a part where you put in a whole component of capacitors. And so that's the thing. There's a supplier generates this device or this box that's there. A person on the assembly line or a machine on the assembly line is attaching that in. Usually it's their rack and some screws that mount it, etc. And we were trying to track to the point of being able to track where all those different components were. And we were doing things trying to be fancy with RFIDs and radio and all that, and they would sort of overlapping each other. And so we were doing some experimenting in some of that. But the value stream is what we were focusing on. And as I mentioned before, we had a drawing of the value stream that was mapped out. That probably, if we put it in one straight linear look, it was probably 24 feet of process of things in and out and where the different suppliers came in, et cetera. But they were able to then take this, do the map. So this is the map of the how things are done, but at the bottom, they run it against time. Time's a pretty important part of value stream in general. And I'm going to talk about a tact process here a little bit later that kind of looks at your overall, not kind of, looks at the overall cycle time and how can we reduce the overall time for things. And again, this has been around a while. And this really brought around the industrial age. Henry Ford figured out a way through assembly lines by moving pieces through it where he could be able to produce a car every couple of minutes in 1910. And that's just phenomenal. You know, and because of that, probably all know the story that he made these cars, but nobody's there to buy it. So what he did, he started paying people enough money where they could buy the product they were doing. So he started, I guess I give him credit with creating the middle class for that. But the ramifications of that is throughout. I mean, it's touches the customer, it touches your suppliers, it touches the workers. And how can we make that value piece more productive and efficient for all of the above? So what I'm saying here, and this again, is project work. Project world is probably 80 to 90% focused on IT things. We're getting more and more change management stuff, and there's always been manufacturing and construction, but a lot of it is based in an IT logical virtual world. So we need to again overlay that with that world with the real world, quote unquote, where the work is getting done. As I mentioned before, it has to do with flow. Now, I'm a project manager. I mentioned I'm a lot in project management. This is based on a project management discipline from PMI's Project Management Institute, which is called Disciplined Agile. And they have a Disciplined Agile value stream component. And what Disciplined Agile is, the worst name for something in the world, because it's not agile. It's supposedly based on the context of where you're at, decide what your goal is to meet that and use the best tool possible. But in the bigger picture, It's where the flow comes in. So customers want something and make a sale. Then there's this whole approval cycle. Our flow should be flowing mainly horizontal left to left. But we put in these cycles that kind of not only add delay, but they maybe take you out from a very good linear flow. And you end up waiting for approvals, which add delay, or the approvals, this doesn't show it here, but a lot of the approvals get rejected. So you end up having to do rework and handing things back and all that. So with efficient value stream, you have very smooth flow. The project manager needs to make sure that any of the work that's happening here either makes that flow a little bit smoother or maybe even eliminates a part of that flow. And instead of having 9 stops along the A Train Express, you only have 7 stops. Theoretically, that should give you a little bit more efficient overall flow, which gives you more efficient productivity, which gives you more efficient cost structure, which should make you more competitive. Now, the other part besides flow that the PM value stream gets into actually gets into 3 parts. Development. And as I mentioned before, this started as an IT focus. It's still mainly rooted in IT, but they're realizing manufacturing has to be a lot of things with logistics, especially in the last couple of years with all the supply chain issues. There's lots of things of lining the supply chain with the value stream and where they are. And, talk about flow. For a year there in 2022, the flow of the boat would come across and stop in a harbor and not be unloaded for a couple days or even a couple weeks, all those pieces. I mean, that had delay, which destroyed the whole value stream. And we all know the ripple effect. We've all felt it in our pocketbooks and supply shortages and everything in the last couple of years when the supply chain got disrupted. So that's where a flow got disrupted. But within here, we first talk about development, that we're developing a process or really a tool. Software tools really reflect an automation of a process. And so how do we make sure that flows? How do we reduce redundant data? How do we only put in data once? How do we make sure that it's valid data? All the different things with data, that the people put it in at the right time. Can we predict what some of it is? There's a lot of things going there. And also now there's a ton of predictive analytic tools that's right right in the heart of what your job is, or quality, that says, okay, we got this mass amount of data. How can we extract or filter from that valuable information to help us be able to run the business? So we have this development piece, and then we have this operational piece. And that's by which, in the General Electric world, that's the actual operation. We're building the box. Years ago, some of you maybe remember there was a Dunkin' Donuts commercial where the guy's so busy making the donuts, you see himself coming and going. They said, "Got to make the donuts, got to make the donuts." That's the way it is in almost all industries. You got to build something for the customer to sell. And so the operational part is the process by which you do the product usage of the delivery. How do you develop, make it happen? And then there's a big piece, support piece. And then a lot of folks don't appreciate the cost that goes into supporting the product. And you end up finding in the support, the help desk world, you're supporting a lot of things that have nothing to do with the product. You may be just doing a psychological safety on your customer, and but dealing with, I'll say, pitiful little things like password resets and some of that. So how does our value stream of support, which has to integrate with the operation, which has to be aligned with the development, so the project manager knows it happens? How do we get those covered? And each one of those are separate value streams. So value streams are in different environments. I mean, one's development, then there is the manufacturing, there's the overall value stream. That's why we probably should use the term value streams more than value stream. But we're trying to break this in to be able to delineate what we do. And I'm again going to make the challenge to especially the project managers, because Project Management Institute, and also business analysts who analyze where these things happen. How do we make sure we know what we're doing, where it fits into the value chain, value stream, and how does it help it? Because unfortunately, and we've probably all been in this situation where we put something in to help the value stream, and you know what? It helped very much, this step right here. But 3 steps down suddenly got clogged up and bogged up because of something that happened here. So what was kind of a smooth mapping a relationship in step 2, I got a little convoluted at step 4. So we need to have this holistic picture, and that's pretty much what's called design thinking today. You know, design thinking doesn't design just an individual component. It designs the ecosystem, the whole thing between the people, process, materials, flows, and how do they fit together. Now, there's another thing within here, as I talk about efficiency in that kind of plays with the value stream, and that's this myth of productivity and the realities of delay. Um, for some reason, there's a lot of models out there that are pretty much sunny day models that people are completely productive on just doing that work. I do several conferences and that during the course of the year, and a lot of times the conferences. How many of you are 100% dedicated to a project on paper? And get maybe half the room raising. Then say, how many of you though, even though you're on paper, how many of you are actually pulled off into other things? And they get about 90% of that group raises their hand. So this myth has to do with we're 100% productive, but we aren't. And so we have things like quality issues that start to bring things in. Um, we don't, and this has to do with defects, but it's not necessarily human error. I mean, there's lots of things that can fit into quality. And again, I don't need to tell you guys this. You could give me, presentation after presentation on how that fits in. But quality issues hit into the overall productive work window. And then a lot of times that brings in rework. And so our productive work decreases more rework. So what we're doing here is we're entering delay, we're introducing um, delay into the project, and we're doing things we don't need to do, or we're doing them twice. And that hurts the overall efficiency of the value stream. And then we've also gotten this point of we're inducing our work. So we're doing some things that maybe um, we started to do because something happened two months ago. It's the analogy, if any of you remember the fairs and et cetera, there used to be a game they talk about where chickens, to get a piece of corn, they would have things at fairs and that where they'd be able to ring a bell or press a button and get a kernel of corn. And the chickens learned a process to do it. So if a chicken learned that if they spun around twice and pressed it, the corn came out, they thought the spinning around twice contributed to the solution there to make that happen. And that's when we start to bring in induced work as a concept, which is basically we're adding things to our whole workflow. And I'm not saying that they're all not of value. That is an illustrative example of just that, illustrative. But we probably are all guilty of having some of these pieces there just because, and they may have very valid reasons. Some of them have extremely valid. Some of it is a good old fashioned, I'm just protecting myself in case something occurs down here, I can bring it out and solve it. So what I'm doing here is I'm losing my productivity of work. So while we're thinking things are here, and this is where the challenge comes in for the project manager, because the project manager is given time frames and all that, thinking our productivity is here, while in reality the productivity is down here. And my position for that is they would have a better understanding of this if they're out there in the field understanding the value stream and where are the things in the value stream that either hamper the delay, hurt the flow, or help the delay, hurt the flow, but then can impact the quality. So these are just some thoughts in general. We seem to have a lot, we built management model for years that try to control the people or control the stuff. Um, and there's things involved like that, the strategies and the analysts and some of that are trying to control worker people, and we're trying to within the intake fund. We have these massive processes of how we even select a project, and it becomes a game on how to make sure the business case says the things that people are looking for so it can get approved. We should focus on our flow and the value of the work. Value through the flow, as opposed to these external things like controlling people or maybe controlling product. How do we flow through efficiently? And that's where I'm going to be talking about as we plan out our project work packages, or if we're playing an agile game, Scrum, whatever, epics and stories and all that we do, we should be able to put them within the work stream. And then there's things that just aren't going to fit in the work stream, but we know that. So we made the conscious decision of where those things are. And I've seen it be kind of effective at prioritization of work also. So I want to get into a little bit more. I'm going to eventually get to bringing this project and work stream together. Another thing about the perception of reality, this is actually taken from a presentation. Nice thing. Organizational strategy creates portfolios and programs, which generates projects, which generate outcomes, capabilities, influence, and they transition to operations where we run the business with metrics, key performance indicators. That gives us feedback to the organizational strategy. And I don't know if there's any consultants on here, but to pick on consultants a second, they like to do that with these nice straight lines that we have these clean, crisp handoffs, that this is done and complete before it goes to the next spot. And we have a good chain of a good flow. Reality, though, for me, is this is a mess. These aren't nice, clean handoffs. These are jagged, rugged handoffs. And a lot of times, I just being this for simplicity, a lot of times there's dead ends or it loops back and even goes back to before it started and comes through. Some of them sort of jump one for a little bit, come back to it. It's not a clean process. The flow isn't nice, clean lines. The flow is going to be rugged. It's going to be difficult. And the value that the project manager brings, or the business analyst, and the business analyst, is to navigate work through these dysfunctional processes and dysfunctional handoff and some of that. And hopefully, when I get to the end towards mapping lessons learned to this, that we learn some things in the project that helps to make that move a little bit better. So spend a little bit of time here on efficiency, effective, ineffective. What makes them ineffective? The handoffs, the handbacks. It had to be redone. There's jokes about it. I was never in the military, but I hear jokes in the military quite a bit. Well, you don't have the right form filled out. Well, I have these 18 other forms filled out. Nope, I need the same information, but it needs to be in another form. That's where we get into handbacks and handoffs. And the delays are people waiting. There's a couple parts here we're waiting for because of poor processes. I'm sure you've all been involved somewhere in your careers where something was sent to somebody for approval and it sat on that person's desk for a couple days. Or it got there on a Friday afternoon, sat there the weekend, they came back on Monday, there was a new fire to attack, and they hadn't had a chance to get to it. So the project manager is probably spending time, getting that in, because their process is very, until we have this signed document, you can't move forward. So we got a project team of 18 people. I can't move forward until this gets signed. So you kind of do workarounds and other things there, and you end up with that convoluted process with the unjagged or the unsmooth line. So waiting for people on my team, waiting people on other teams. And so that's one's a poor process. And the other is probably some poorly formed teams. Or within here with other teams, poor management. There's lots of things. When you bring in people, there's lots of things within the people. And then getting feedbacks. A lot of times we send something down and we don't know. When we were doing Berlin Factory, one of our supplier customers came in and said, this was 2016, by the way, said, I don't understand. Said, I can buy a compact disc player or compact disc on Amazon.com, and it'll tell me it's $11.99 for a compact disc, and Amazon can tell me every spot it is along the way to being delivered. I'm buying a $15 million electrical distribution unit from you, and all you can tell me is, well, it's scheduled to be out there in a couple of weeks. There's something wrong with that. And egg in our face, yeah, there is, but it's not as easy. And so you need to start working on some of those things. And then a lot of it wasn't easy because we had some ineffective, inefficient ways to track what was going on, what were the value stream pieces these were handling. So that's one. Then the rework, integration, and also we're multitasking. People are doing different things and just plain old poor quality. We have defects. Yeah, it's good enough. So we'll move it on to the next part. And we all know stories about how some of those things happen. And then where this goes to, to finish this, kind of wrap this up, is silos. And this is an example. I'm going to talk a little bit about silos in general. This first one has to do with the silos that are distinct and separated and et cetera. And by the way, silos are there for a reason. Silos aren't always bad. There's sometimes for regulatory and compliance issues, you have things in a silo where that work's done separately. For human safety rules, if you're doing some manufacturing or even product safety rules, manufacturing, you need to keep these two elements separate until you get to the point where it's the right to be able to blend them together to do the final product. So this one's in one silo, the other's in another silo. You're doing just-in-time inventory where somebody's bringing you this one part, and so they have their silo where they're building their part, and yours comes together. So silos are bad because they do introduce delay, and when you have distance between the silos, is a problem. But there's a more creative way you can look at some of this. These are silos in a barn somewhere in Ohio. Not sure exactly where, but also in Ohio is a green distribution spot on the Maumee River, which is on Lake Erie, and it's a huge port in the port of Toledo, where they've taken these different silos, but they've worked and built this mural that has them flow together. So it still has the silo. This is a metaphor, but it has the silos. But through working your flows and your processes, the silos are able to work together. I guess to continue the metaphor a little bit, we don't need tall silos. We need shorter silos so there's less handoff up and down between the two. But you're not going to completely eliminate silos. So rather than spend tons of time trying to eliminate it, maybe there's ways we can improve the flow between them. So that's a challenge I make to business analysts and project managers everywhere. So, here, this little motherhood apple pie. By including siloed departments, processes, and single diagrams, I'm back to my value stream map. The mapping helps the business identify waste across the value stream in more efficient operations. So if we're not looking at just this one silo here, but we're looking at how they flow together, that will improve the efficiency. Now, again, we're not going to put this stuff in and suddenly all problems go away and they're perfect. That's not a realistic goal, but continuous improvement. We're doing better. We're doing better. Okay, I'm going to take a second here. And some of you that if you see me on screen, I think my camera's on, isn't it? So you get an idea what I look like. Yeah, that's me. The beard is real, and I do wear the red suit occasionally. And it's actually the backstory. Pretty quick. I had a sister who was at Zion Cancer Institute. We went to take her home for Christmas. The nurses teased her relentlessly about having Santa for her brother. You don't have to drive in Chicago traffic. You take the sleigh, blah, blah, blah. She died 2 days after Christmas, and it sort of was a calling for me. So I do mostly work. Well, my work's with autistic children, special needs adults, and all that. And it's kind of weird. I put on a red suit, and it's people their whole life lights up. It may only be for a few minutes, but still, they're just that aura. So I've learned so much. Well, one, humility, but communication and some of those other skills we talk about are essential. This is an incubator for me to learn them and lessons learned. So some of these things I bring in actually have to do with just being a human being, working with other folks and hoping to spread a little bit of happiness and joy into people for a few minutes. So but I also use it frequently to do a break in the presentation to go from one topic to another. So I'm going to hear why is it important to visualize the value stream? Again, identify inefficiencies, which I've been talking about, the bottlenecks, the bad things, right? and that the getting rid of those bad things, we end up with a better overall product, good movement, good flow, good karma, and that insurance should drive higher customer satisfaction. Again, now here's the box. Different value stream components, different tools in order to illustrate pieces of the value stream within the maps. Again, I'm not going to read these to you, but there's swim lanes, there's Kanban boards, there's Gantt chart. I do want to spend just a brief moment on Kanban boards. Kanban boards are wonderful, great, they're ubiquitous, everybody uses them, but not everybody uses them the right way. I was involved in a project where we're building, actually we're writing a new edition of the PMI Business Analyst Practice Board, Practice Guide. And so we were going to use a Kanban board to flow work through. The person that was kind of running this, they just love to make new columns. They didn't like the idea of different attributes. So we had a column for, this was in delay because we didn't get this component from somebody. But then if another piece was, it was in delay because we were waiting for something else, rather than put that as an attribute of the card to keep you working, they wanted a new column. They wanted a new column. So we went from a 4-column Kanban board to a 16-column Kanban board. It didn't work. In order to manage our works and our flow, we needed to be the efficiency. The whole thing we say why we do these, we need to have the discipline to execute them. So I'd say lessons learned from a project perspective is let's be disciplined on what we're doing. And think of, okay, yeah, it's easy to add another column. And everybody will know if it's in there and it distinguishes blah, blah, blah. But does it improve your overall work? So, but these are different tools. Again, it's there for you to peruse at your pleasure. The other thing that's really important in all this, and I'll go through this fairly quickly. What drives these things? Why are there value streams? Why aren't they just universal? Why can't I just go out to valuestream.com and buy a value stream? Well, the industries or whatever the value stream is has a bunch of regulations. So first and foremost, you need to have legal compliance. I mean, your business isn't going to have very much of a return on investment if it's doing things illegal. Or maybe it might have a big one, but it may not be sustainable. So legal compliance kind of drives overall how the business is done. And legal compliance, all that, how the business works is culture. So culture will drive what the policies are. And the policies define the guardrails. You know, for value stream, there have to be banks on either side, but it defines what space we in, what products are we in, where are we focused, our core values. So our guardrails help define the guardrails, define the policy, govern the value stream. And so then the value stream will drive process. And the process drives the adoption of the outcomes and capabilities. And if you follow this, the visual piece here, which brings about change. Now, from production, you're not doing change. You're trying to be very consistent. But from the overall ebb and flow of running a business and being able to produce good products, you do have change. So all this kind of works into change, which is what a project does. A project delivers outcomes and capabilities, something new for the way we do our job. And it maybe eliminate some old, add some new, whatever. So there's a combination of different things, but it's not in and of itself by the change. You need to be able to see where does it fit in with the culture? Where does it fit in? Is it legal to even do these things? So let's bring workstream and project together. Again, my little workstream icon, and here's a project which has initiate, flow, and people are involved. This is a benefits realization map. And we've been doing some of these flow things for years in the project program management world. We have things where this has kind of some big categories at the top with some process flows on the chevron. Usually with the beginning of a project, there's a whole bunch of potential benefits. So you get this list of potential benefits. And then there's some, I use the term artifact, but there's some documents you have that record and track all this stuff. But as you flow through the work being done, some of these are Darwinian benefits. Only the strongest survive. This might have seemed like a good idea here, but as we looked at it and got into the confirm and map, it didn't didn't pan out, didn't pass the tests. And then as we get into socializing with other folks, there's some groups that maybe don't want to deal with it or think it's outside of what we should be doing, but they streamline and they get down to these final benefits that we're here. But where are we monitoring these benefits? Where does that fit in on the value chain? I mean, we aren't measuring everything at the end. We're doing intermittent pieces, and now we're getting much, much, much better at predictive analytics. What's the next step going to be? Actually, I joked before about Chabia. Artificial intelligence is a great predictive tool. I mean, it does fantastic job of predictive, but it's not a strong thing and everything else to being able to come across with maybe prescriptive things to do or lining the history and being able to track the chain of where things happen and perhaps a root cause of why is this, I'll not just pick on this man, why is this one not performing as I hoped for? And it could be because way back here something happened. So we're building these together. Where do these benefits fit within our value stream? And as a Project Manager 101 says we do strategy. We're aligning with the strategy. I had the graphic earlier. So our strategy needs to align with the value stream, which needs to align with our process. Epics has a fancy way of saying in an agile type environment that we're writing the story of the whole business solution. And then it's broken down into individual functions, which are broken down into work packages, which are developed and delivered. So the alignment of all this is becoming the project and program manager's job. So again, we should be able to take any work package, whether we do it as a task or a collection of tasks or whatever, and say, where does this fit in with the value stream? So as we repackage this, we actually allow these epics or these big stories kind of become their own value stream, a value stream of change or information. We need to, with the project outcomes, map the process steps and the value stream. That's what we're going to be doing here in a little bit. And how do the outcomes and capabilities impact the value stream? Does it help with productivity? Does it help with capacity? These are fundamental components of how we do business, especially in the manufacturing piece, or also within information technology or human resources, change management. I was involved in a project a year or so ago where, because of the PCI, which is payment card industry, it's how all the rules go with processing payment cards. We had to swap out all those. As most of you probably know, over the last couple of years, the credit cards getting mostly involved with chips and swipes and all that, which required a hardware upgrade to be able to do that. And so we had to upgrade them, all of them. And we ran an issue with capacities. And people said, hey, we should be able to do this in a couple months, no problem. But there were like 7,000 different ones sitting throughout the entire organization, a medical organization. So we had them in hospitals, different billing things and all that. And you know what? We didn't have enough people. We didn't have the capacity to service all these. So we had to look at, where does the capacity come in? Where's the productivity? And the idea was that a person will show up at the same time this device will show up, and the network and the background configuration will all show up at the same time, and boom, 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 it can be done in 2 minutes. We had about a 3% efficiency of getting that boom, boom, boom right away. There were many calls, especially get the configuration lined up and all those different things. So all these things weren't working great. And some of them were more efficient, but our throughput was hurt because our capacity was maxed and we weren't able to be most efficient there. So first thing we need to do is map our work to the value stream. And this is a little bit of a detour, but the mapping of people, process, and how we run the business is important. If we're doing things based on our value stream, then somebody, and I say this becomes a part of the PM, project manager or program manager, who's ever kind of making sure these investments are made and being delivered, need to be able to communicate across multiple areas how these work together and be able to use these soft skills or power, whatever term we want to use, along with some pretty hard skills, like some data literacy enterprise, how they work together, and be able to talk intelligently to anybody in the business on how these processes work. We had an organization, a PMO, that was trying to gain traction. And they put together what they thought was a great presentation that they'd pitched to vice presidents for why they need to get the enterprise PMO involved. Their model had to do with we're air traffic controllers. They never got past that statement because you know what? The minute they said the word control, that's the only thing these executives heard. You want to come in and control us? No. That's it. We're done listening. So they went through the whole thing. At the end, there were reasons why they couldn't. The model is we're not an air traffic controller. We navigate work through these processes using these different skills and different capabilities. I like to put the analogy that we're helping a business go down the Amazon River in order to deliver something to the customer. And it's a guide to the Amazon River. You know when you need to take the canoe out of the river, forge to go around rapids or whatever. You know where the places are to sleep at night. You know which things, don't touch those alligator type things, so you know those dangers and how to identify them. You know where we should be meeting. There's a supply spot here. We should be meeting. You know all those different pieces to get that work down through that jungle. And that's where the value comes in, is being able to navigate that for one group. Then once that's done, they're there, you come back and you do it for the next one. So we navigate work through our skills and competencies, our cultures and process people. I don't care what your role or your job title is. I care what skills and competencies you have and how you use them. Whether your job title is project manager, testing supervisor, developer, whatever, you're doing some of those. You're still doing analysis, let's say. So no matter where you are, you're doing analysis. You're also trying to advise and influence people. You're also hopefully continuously growing your skill sets, your knowledge, your education, our lessons learned, and applying those things. So let me take this into what some of the IT value stream pieces are. Again, this has the box. So this is here for later. If I were to ask you guys, we spend 10 minutes, go off and define some value streams, this is probably the list you'd come back with. But the value stream and project planning, this is 2 pages because I couldn't get it all in one, does have some basic core things you need to do. You need to understand the value stream. And you know, the only way you're going to understand the value stream is to talk to people that are working in it. Maybe go out there and see them instead of sitting in our conference rooms or at home where we're having all these video calls and spend 80% of our time sitting on Zoom calls or WebEx calls. Can you get out to where the work's being done? And then can you identify the key people? You build the relationships. So you understand the value stream, you build the relationships with the people doing the work. Then you're able to analyze the stream, not necessarily the product, but the stream. How do things flow together? And analysis is quite simple, from an academic perspective. Analyzing is, how does this piece of data get to be here? And you know what? If I do something to this thing, what's the results going to be? That's analysis. That's critical thinking. Convergent thinking, let's come up with a bunch of ideas for how things fit together. And then divergent is breaking that apart. And then develop a project plan. The planning is essential. The plan is worthless. That's actually a Dwight David Eisenhower quote. But that's where the project manager needs to keep things moving. Like I said, the flow as we're going down the Amazon River. We don't spend time to see, well, is that a crocodile? I should do this. If it's an alligator, I should do that. We're flowing, and based on a plan. The plan is if we deal with an alligator or a crocodile, we don't go kick it. Maybe that's not planned. Maybe that's more of a policy, but still. And then consider the impact of the project on the entire value stream. And that, again, that's communication, but it's also knowing how the value stream works today. Set the milestones and then monitor the project. So this is kind of motherhood apple pie things, but how does that map in with the value stream? So project management outcomes, where they fit in with the value stream. And here's a bunch of value stream metrics by titles. And again, it has a box came over here because it didn't fit over in the upper right-hand corner. And then how many are familiar with Gemba walks? Gemba walks are something that's been around for a long time, but it's basically going to the real place where the work's happening. And where that is happening, the workers are presenting their metrics and how we're doing, what went well, what isn't, what are our pain points, our failures, our defects, etc. But it's not like somebody puts together a spreadsheet that goes to somebody else who puts a bunch of spreadsheets together to do a bunch of spreadsheets. It's going out into the field and being able to talk with people doing the work. What do you see as our problem for that? And you get that unfiltered root thought. And as a project manager, business analyst, how can we incorporate that into our project deliverables? So there's this, you don't just see the data, but there's a story behind the data and listening to it and building that relationship again. Uh, you find a lot more being out in the field talking to someone and building a relationship because they're not going to talk to you right away. If you're a business analyst, I've been this where we went into the field to get something. That guy had zero incentive to talk to me about it. It's like, okay, you're coming here to get rid of my job. So it was talking to him, and then after the initial conversation, that day saying thank you, but a couple days later, hey, can I paraphrase what you're doing? Am I getting this right? Is this your story? And maybe getting a little feedback there. And as you build that relationship, okay, so I hear you answering that and you make the changes. Is this more like it? As that relationship developed with them, they were actually calling me up with suggestions and ideas. So listening to the story behind the data and applying what we're hearing. And then if we go back to the PMI exam things and stuff like that, that's helping us break free of the cognitive bias. Cognitive bias, basically, in this context, we had made up our mind before we went in, but no, we try not to. And so we should be able to use these results, the Gemba results, the KPI results, what's happening in here as input and to make sure our work packages are right, that our work packages can define how do we impact these pieces of the value stream. And then this is TACI methodology, which I talked about before a little bit. And TACI basically identifies through transport, arrange, Kaizen, where the time, the cycle times, and how can we improve them. Uh, this again's a box, I'm not going to spend much time on it. But Kaizen's a concept I want to spend a second on because that's looking at the overall value stream, the overall flow of value streams, and how can we improve them. If any of you have been involved in a Kaizen project evaluation, they're very, very, very powerful and good, but you don't start off on day one. I'm getting that feeling. Day one, you really, at least my experience, what the heck are we doing this for? This is a mess. But after you get in, if you have a good facilitator in that, you can understand those pieces. And then you can do the value stream maps and that based on that. And again, go back to the project and where do my deliverables fit in there? So our learnings, what are the things we're learning to do our throughputs and all that? We should take some of these things in. And some of these aren't in the original project scope. So as the project manager, you probably have some scope issues and other things, which is a whole nother challenge. Because I'll tell you right now, the project manager, they talk about this stuff a lot, review lessons learned, but no, they want you immediately, project manager, here's the project. I want the schedule by Tuesday. Boom. Well, don't I get time to do lessons? You don't need to do that crap. We know what they are. I need the schedule. And really the schedule, can you do it by this date? Oh, you have no choice. You have to do it by this date. And actually what we end up doing instead of managing the project is eliminating scope. And benefits is another one. Benefits in the value stream. I talked about benefits before. This is a little graphic, the same thing. So those benefits are chained together. So we make sure how, because one part of a benefit feeds into another, et cetera. So where do benefits fit into the value stream? And emergent benefits is basically a way of saying benefits we didn't identify at the beginning, but we realize as we get into mapping them into the value stream where some of these can come in and become extremely valuable. And then that drives guided continuous improvement. This again, the project management discipline agile thing. Continuous improvement by autonomous does a certain level, improvement generally you dip at the beginning, get better. So just continuous improvement has this level of overall improvement. But if we guide it, which means that we apply the lesson learned, we apply those things. We're able to get much more productivity in a short amount of time. And the basic concept of this is start where you are, do the best. Don't have a huge months and months and months and months that we're going to analyze this before we even kick anything off. Start somewhere and start going with it. I'm going to jump through this really quickly, but this is just a way of breaking the columns out to the different areas of where we can focus on things we should be looking at as deliverables. I wanted to spend one really quick on an MBI. A minimum business increment is a fancy way of saying a small function that improves the business. Instead of trying to have this whole big, release 2.7, this is focusing in on the piece that calculates sales tax, predictively calculates sales tax and service charges based on previous history. Because obviously I'm just throwing that one together because that makes no sense, but you never know. So then in addition to all this stuff, how do we achieve these things? The management's got to be involved to facilitate value, not control the people, not dictate the team, but support the team. This is where system thinking comes in. We need to have that whole big picture, as we say in DA, the enterprise awareness piece. And then finally, the organization, the value stream in general, must provide the positive influence. We need to make sure that the things we're doing are positive. And the example here, do the HR policies encourage positive actions or deter it? And we've all been there where we put in this great thing that this whole value proposition is it's going to make everybody happy, and it does the exact opposite. Here's another big thing. And moonshine, I'm really tempted to mention a Tennessee joke, but then I decided to go and put, by the way, I'm West Virginia blood in me, so I do have mountain in my bloodstream. Wanted to just then put this so it was supporting, but moonshine has nothing to do, the moonshine policy has nothing to do with the still. It is something that actually Toyota invented, which was taking a piece out of that value stream and focusing in on that. I bring it in because with those distribution units I was mentioning, we were having a problem as the robots were setting screws that they weren't all going in all the way, that there were some problems with there. And so we weren't having the racks mounted as tight as they should be. And so we had somebody that decided, hey, let's look at the screws. And because they felt that not all the screws are the same. So they built this little thing that they were extremely proud of, a centrifugal force thing, like a funnel. And the weak, lesser weight screws would kind of spin up to the top and fall out. And with that, we actually found an algorithm as we did kitting of a project, which means we had all the materials there as the person put it in. They didn't have to go to an inventory. That we could weigh these components, and if they were within a certain weight, the odds were good that they were all fine. So we put in, from a moonshine idea, a weighting piece that if it was plus or minus 1/100th of a gram, it has potential to be bad. So we would take it off and have that reevaluated and the individual pieces tested. Greatly improved the quality, but it was driven in by something that the plant did based on that value stream, that looked at the quality of the components, then brought that into a project, which was the overall Brilliant Factory. And then the lessons learned. So we do these things, we do this project, we understand things we're doing on the project better, but we're also learning how to run the business better. And so the lessons learned isn't just for project management piece, but the organization needs to incorporate that too. So we should be looking at a couple different things. Our lessons learned, what are we learning on the process? So process improvement. What are we doing with our resource allocations? Because as project manager, we are being the stewards of resources for the organization to make sure we're spending these resources in the best way to deliver value. And then finally, risk management. So process is, how does work flow? Resources to make sure we have the right things flowing there. And then risk, those guardrails, and making sure that we're within a risk tolerance area. Again, there's lots of stories you can probably hear where people do that. This is a great fodder for movie. Jurassic Park's an example of one where, there was severe risks that they went rogue dinosaurs and etc. So we're able to manage that piece. Would be an example of risk management within the project. Yeah, we can do these dinosaurs fairly quickly, but there's a risk that some of them go rogue and eat each other. A pretty major risk. So that's an exaggeration, but still those little risk things can end up being huge. Real world example of that a couple years ago, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of a software package called Kronos that does payroll for the most part, time clocking and etc. They had a ransomware attack on the cloud based thing. They were down for 7 weeks. 7 weeks of not being able to process accurate paychecks. So businesses were doing it based on previous work. That's a pretty significant risk because they didn't have the corporate tools in place to prevent ransomware or how to adjust to ransomware. Huge lessons learned. So that's why the risk may even go back to the product support. It may have nothing to do with the product you're delivering, but the support of it. So I'm going to go and sort of round this up. I know I'm getting towards the end of my time of mapping this stuff towards action. So here's a simple map, improvement ideas that come up, and then what are some of the actions that occur? And it can be multiple. So say we have this piece here where one of the lessons learned was, everybody didn't understand the objectives. So there's some things, action we can take for them. Better intake information in the intake. The team can work to create a vision box. We have more involvement from the portfolio and the product team. We allocate resources. But the idea is from these improvement ideas that come up from a lessons learned session, we do something with them. We just don't say, okay, we have some lessons learned and throw them in a digital junk drawer somewhere to never be seen again. And this, just continues on and on with multiple improvement ideas and map them to the action. And sometimes different ideas can be input into the same action. So, I'm doing this purposely with color and et cetera to distinguish because there's some overlap here and they go up and down. But we have a bad habit for the most part of saying we did lessons learned, but not really bringing it back to map to how can we take actions or what actions can we take to either maximize the benefit of the lessons learned or reduce the risk from the lessons learned. And we can also take that over to the value stream. And I'm purposely very generic here because, well, one, it's not probably going to be summarized by 8 words. But if we had a step in the value streams and improvement idea we had, what action do we need to take to make that happen? And it may be a couple. And in this model that I'm putting together, it really had to do with some business analytics. Been involved in doing some things with BI, Power BI. So, what are some things we can do? And, hey, if we do this in the value stream, hey, in order to do that, we need to have epics. We need to have some things. We need to attend the Gemba walks. We developed a better need for understanding the KPIs, and the CCC just had the name of a KPI, again, fictional. How do those map? This is another lesson learned. How do these map to action to take? So as we're done with this and we learn, not as we're done, but as we're going through, as we learn these things, let's map them to action in order to get improvement. And what's killed us for years, especially in the IT, all of us in general, is we supposedly wait till the end and, hey, we have this whole list of things. So now let's go get a new project to be able to implement those. So I might have learned this lesson in January of 2018, and it doesn't even get to see the light of day until February of 2023. So we need to be able to get past that, what we learn, map it to the value stream, and then map that to actions to take in order to realize the improvement ideas. Oh, and then there's a whole range of things. Again, this is illustrative, but still, we probably all do things where we have the improvement ideas, but are we capturing and taking action for those appropriately? So I want to thank you. When I end here, I don't know how many are familiar with the word of Shuhari, which is an agile methodology, which basically says, first you learn the rule. So you learn how is it done today. And then you take some risk and challenge the rule and do something new. That's the ha part. And you know what? It works so well, it becomes which means it is the new rule. So if we look at that continuous improvement, applying the things we do against the value stream and how do they really, where the rubber hits the road, help the overall organization improve, that's going to help the entire PMO world. So thank you. I guess questions, comments, I did run just a little bit over. So I apologize for that, but I
I'm
just
going to stop the video.
sometimes get sucked into rabbit holes.
I'm going to stop the video now.